long time ago, a very long time ago, a hunter went hunting in the forest. And as the hunter was riding along, his eye spotted a skull. And the hunter got off of his horse and he went up to the skull and he said, "Who brought you here?" And the skull said, "Talking brought me here." Well, the hunter, he was so freaked out with this that he got back on his horse and he rode back to the community and he told everyone, "There is a talking skull in the forest. There is a talking skull in the forest." And the people like you, they were storytellers, so everybody ran around and they said, "Girl, there's a talking skull in the forest, you know. I see the thing with my own eyes." I said, "Girl, there's a talking skull in the forest. You gotta come and see this thing." So the queen and her people, they heard about this talking skull, and the queen demanded to see the talking skull. So the queen and her people and the hunter, they got on their horses and they rode back to the exact spot where the skull was. And the hunter got off of his horse and he said, "My man, I'm back. Who brought you here?" And the skull said nothing. And the hunter said, "Come on, you got to say a little something. You spoke before. Who brought you here?" And the skull said nothing. And the hunter said, come on. You see that lady over there? She's getting really, really upset. You know, you got to say something. Give me the first letter of the alphabet, a sweet nothing, something. Who brought you here?" And the skull still said nothing. Now, the queen thought that this was a waste of time or some kind of silly joke or trick. So the queen said to her people, "Off with the hunter's head." And as the queen and her people were riding out of the forest, the skull looked over at the hunter's head and said, "Fool, I said fool. Did I not tell you that talking brought me here?" And so tonight is the night of talking and of stories. And that story took place a long time ago. This was before Eddie Bullen was an idea. This was before Don Simpson was an idea. This was before Eddie discovered a love of music. This was before Don discovered a passion for education. This was before Eddie showed great competence in music. And this was before Don got even more excited about research and being a researcher. This was before Eddie played with everybody in the world who was great. But not only did Eddie play in the world with people who were great, they were playing with Eddie because he was great. And this was before Don decided that I'm not only going to be a researcher and an educator and an entrepreneur, I'm also going to be a mentor. That story that I told you took place. And so tonight we have brought two people together, Eddie Bullen with his music and Don Simpson with his narration. And these two cultures and these two people are coming together in brotherhood. And then they thought, pop, we need to get another person into the mix. And so they looked across the border and they saw Hawk all the way in Harlem. And they thought, Harlem, that's a Renaissance kind of conversation. And so they said word by their brain and mentally, and they sort of trapped Hawk. And Hawk came across the border, crossing the border. He wasn't out of order. And he came to join these two brothers in this music and this evening of storytelling and music. I'm going to pass the baton on now to the narrator for the evening, and that's none other than Don Simpson. Give them a round of applause.
There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood, lead on to fame and fortune. Omitted, all the voyages of our life is spent in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current where it serves, or lose our ventures. We must take the current where it serves, or lose our ventures. These words by the ancient historical storyteller, William Shakespeare, remind us that there are periodic times in our life when there's a demand for us to reach and find courageously some new level of leadership for the good of our community. It seems to me that this is one of those times. It's a time of tension. It's a time of divisive identity politics. It's a time when people with different values and intentions about cross-cultural relationships are engaged in a battle for our minds and hearts. So Eddie and I, two people with very different backgrounds and different ages, but some shared values, decided a few months ago we would undertake what we referred to as a musical storytelling friendship journey. And our journey was aimed at helping people to get inspired by telling them some marvelous stories of people of African descent with whom we've come in contact. So I invite you tonight to sit back, relax, use your imagination. Think of yourself as an explorer on a journey of self-discovery. It's not a physical journey. It's a journey of the mind, of the heart, of our soul. It's a journey in search of ideas and models that might help us each improve our own particular performances. It's a journey in search of ways to help people commit to respecting diversity and making an effort to improve cross-cultural harmony. It's a journey where Eddie and I would like to inspire a quiet revolution, not a violent revolution or a military one, but a revolution in people's thinking about their own abilities and their own responsibilities. It's a musical storytelling friendship journey about inspiring musicians and storytellers of African descent. And tonight, we focus our journey in search of the magical global impact of musicians and storytellers from the Caribbean. We're so delighted to be launching this test podcast in this environment, which clearly is an oasis for people of diverse ethnic backgrounds who come together in a welcoming environment that encourages continuous learning and continuous respect for each other. Aita, we are honored that you've invited our small traveling team to consider using this as our base in Toronto. Let's start the night's journey then by hearing a bit about the early life of one of those young musicians who had an impact way beyond the small island of Grenada where he was born.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I immigrated from a really small island, Grenada, 100,000 people, where I grew up with music was all around me. My dad was a musician, so subsequently he had a music store. and we would have frequent jam sessions. You know, musicians would come into town, and my dad would shut the shop down and just have a jam session, and it'll be traffic jam. People can't get home because we're playing music, and I'm sitting in the corner, and I'm just watching these musicians have such a wonderful time. And at the time I was studying karate, everybody was trying to be Bruce Lee. Remember that? Yes. And I had a duel with a young man, and he punched me so hard that I felt his fist in the back of my neck. And I decided then, I said, you know what? There must be an easier way to get respect. So I decided right then I'm definitely pursuing music. So my dad sold the school of piano. It was an all-boys school, and I remember vividly one lunchtime I decided to go play the organ. There were about 2 or 3 songs, popular calypso songs that I knew, and I went in, started playing it, and behold, there was a lot of boys, about 100 boys gathering around and going, "Wow, Eddie, you are amazing." And I'm like, that's my ticket. So I started playing and practicing really hard, and there were a couple of other guys who were also musicians. And you know, we call on the block when the guys are you guys know what liming is, right? Yes. And for those of you who don't know what liming is, it's just hanging out. So for the guys who were hanging out, they were comparing me with the other musicians. And, you know, being the son of a musician, I had to be the best. So I practiced really hard, and my dad really pushed me. So anyway, that is kind of my early introduction into music. And in the island, those of you who are old enough to know that Grenada was the last place to take on the United States in a war. Did you know that? Oh yeah, Grenadians are very feisty people. I think it's the bread pudding. Yeah, we took on the United States. We lost, however. But before that, there was some events leading up to it. And as a young man, I witnessed some of those events. I remember vividly. Actually, I'll talk about Maurice Bishop. Maurice Bishop was the Prime Minister of Grenada. And Maurice was like an older brother. He didn't talk that much, but his office was almost directly across from my dad's place. And I'd see him every day. And he'd come out of it. He's a lawyer, so he'd come out of his office and go to his car, and he'll wave. And my dad would wave and say, "Hi, Maurice," because we knew his father. My mom rented her dressmaking shop from them. So we were pretty close. So I knew Maurice pretty well, and I saw him almost every day. And there were a bit of unrest in Grenada, and I remember the school children, the high school kids were having demonstrations. They were not happy with the government, and this has been going on off and on. And Maurice was one of the organizers of that. And I was coming from school one day, and at a vantage point, Grenada is very hilly, so there was a place called the Wharf, and you can see the demonstrators. You know, we'd see them from time to time when we were coming from school. But this one day, we're coming from school, and we looked down and we saw them, and they have the bullhorn, and they were talking, and the students were reacting. And then we saw a gang called the Mongoose Gang that the Prime Minister of Grenada had his special secret police, and they were coming. And I remember Maurice saying, just let them pass. And the crowd sort of opened up and just trying to let them pass. And then all hell broke loose. People were jumping in the sea. Cars were being tumbled over. Shots was fired. And we're standing there. I mean, it was several yards. I mean, kind of about 2 or 3 miles away from this. So we were watching this, and just after my dad came and picked us up. But that was a really, scary moment in my life, that just seeing that whole thing go down. And if you look, or if you ask any Grenadian who bit older, they'll remember they called Bloody Monday. That's how we called it. It was called Bloody Monday. And after that, there was the overthrow. We woke up one morning, and several years later, actually Maurice's father got shot in that, and about 4 years later, there was a coup. We woke up one morning. Again, Eddie is listening to music. I'm not paying attention to the radio. I have my stereo on, and I'm blasting my music before I go to school. My dad is cool with that. And we're driving down, and then when we got, about 10 minutes to our store, we saw these troops with guns, and my dad was like, what's happening? Because that was something that we never saw. And that morning, it was a coup. We woke up and there was a different government. And so I put on the radio, I took out my tape deck, I had a cassette, took out a tape deck, put on the radio, and it said, "Stay at home, this is a curfew. If you leave your house, you will be shot on sight." And we are outside driving. And my dad just had to turn the car around and went back to our home. And after that time, there was a lot of rationing and, no gasoline, no water, no electricity. All those things kind of went away for a bit. However, music was a big part of my life. So I had lots of batteries with a tape deck, and I just put my headphones on, and myself and my brother listened to all the jazz albums that my dad had. And anyway, those just a couple of things that happened to me when I was growing up, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, thank you, Eddie. So you can see that part of our journey for Eddie and I is getting to know a little more about each other's background and the things that influence what you're doing as an adult. And our first attempt then to share some of that journey, we had a wonderful evening late June at Rosemary's Salon down on Davenport. We called the evening Out of Africa. We were introducing the journey by tracking the lives of musicians and writers from Africa around the world to various diasporas. And part of that program focused on people of African descent that we worked with here in Canada. And for those of you, and there are a number of you here tonight who were there that night, the film clips from that event will start appearing on our Friendship Journey site that we're pledged to launch in the first quarter of 2019. And the filming that's being done tonight will start appearing on that site also. Turning the attention tonight to the Caribbean, we're looking at the forced migration of a lot of people to the Caribbean in the past. Big numbers. 9 million slaves came to the Americas from Africa. The interesting thing is to note that Barbados received as many slaves as the United States did. Jamaica received twice as many slaves as the United States did. And for many of us in this part of the world, those stories aren't as well known as the stories from the American South. So that's part of what our journey is about. And history books talk about that triangular trade: slaves to the Americas agricultural products back in the same boats heading to Europe, and then manufactured goods going from Europe to Africa to pick up another boatload. It's an incredibly negative trade story. But it allows the Caribbean to say, in fact, they were the test group for the world's first global economic system, which was really used to enable the Industrial Revolution in Europe. So what Eddie and I have been trying to do is tell a new narrative about a cultural triangular trade, the movement of artists and musicians from Africa to Europe to the Americas. And when you look at the movement of people into the Caribbean, there were many other people who came other than slaves from Africa. There were indentured servants from China, from India, from Portugal, from Indonesia. So clearly the Caribbean has become a multicultural community. And I guess I started to get that driven home to me by one of my early friends in Guyana, Bobby Moore. Bobby for a while served as the national historian of Guyana. He was involved in the founding, and he introduced me to the first Carifesta. Those of you know who those big Caribbean cultural festivals. The first one was 1982 in Georgetown. And as I got to know this marvelous man, I saw him happily speaking of his mixed Indian, African, and Chinese background. If we're going to tell a narrative of a cultural triangular trade, we need some new voices to help us kickstart that. So we invited one of my extended family from Harlem, Hawthorne Smith, and come on up here, Hawk. Hawk has a great tradition to draw on, the tradition of his two very artistic parents, one an immigrant from Jamaica. He can draw on his professional life where he's a clinical director of a quite amazing Bellevue Hospital, New York University program for survivors of torture. He's also the founder and songwriter for a band called Casamantequilla. And those of you who know that iconic band Talking Heads will be delighted to know that in the last number of months, David Byrne has discovered Hawk and his team and is busy promoting them on his site as one of the reasons to be cheerful in this world. And finally, we are happy that Hawk has now become a novelist and just finished his first manuscript telling an amazing story of the cultural connections between North America and Africa through the lives of some musicians. Hawk, help us put your own particular stamp on this friendship journey.
In the effort lies the art. These were words my grandfather gave to my father, who gave to me. My father was a very well-respected artist. I can see I see a wonderful place where hopefully I can donate a couple of prints. But he always said, it doesn't matter if your works show in a museum like his do. It doesn't matter if you're a musician or a singer. If you win prestigious awards, or if you get 100,000 downloads or any of that sort of thing. That's not what's important. What's important is that if you sing a song and you're able to bring a smile, or perhaps bring a tear, or maybe even just help that person tap their foot a little bit or lighten their load, you have made an invaluable contribution to the musical canon. This is the tradition of our people and the people of the Caribbean. And sometimes that person that you help to make feel better, even if that person is you, is extraordinarily important, because that can be the most important audience there is. And if you can do that, you are a singer. You are a musician. Because our cultures and the cultures of the Caribbean, we live at the crossroads. If you've ever gone to a Vodun ceremony or Condomble, or the people who speak to the Orisha, oftentimes it's the chalk. It's the crossroad is the first thing that is traced out. Down in the southern United States, where my people come down in more hoodoo traditions and blues, I mean, that's where Robert Johnson went to sell his soul so he could play the blues. The crossroads is a living entity. But I think that it's more than just a two-dimensional aspect. The crossroads has a horizontal plane and a vertical plane. And that horizontal thing is not a line, it's a plane. We are all engaged in that horizontal plane. We are sharing space, we are sharing time. Contemporaneously, we are together. The entire world, we are on that horizontal plane. And the vertical plane, that's what connects us to those who have gone before and those who are yet to come. The crossroads isn't just a place. We live the crossroads. Wherever we go, we carry it with us. And we know that the crossroads is a place of magic. And how do we spark that magic? Sometimes it can just be a rhythm. Something as simple as chick-kum, kum, chick, 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 chick-kum. Eddie Bowen's very talented son, Quincy, is helping us out with this. Field hollers and alley shouts. The sweat from her brow in a cane field in Guadalupe falls on the red clay of Georgia, spawning juju memories and Goombay dreams. A deep Mississippi blues mounts its horse like a Haitian chevalier, rides into a Kingston dance hall just in time to spit funky rhymes and peel paint from the walls with a blazing trumpet solo. The sisters in church will wail with such force as to wake the ancestors and Los Santos, to bless a crying baby who has already understood the secret of expressing, I am here and will be heard. It is our communal responsibility to make sure that the bawling youngster never forgets the deep wisdom that is her birthright. That's a tune just emphasizing that triangular cultural trait. That's something called Ngor. Had the pleasure of writing when I was studying in West Africa, in Senegal, as a young man, and beginning to understand the connections that we have, and that music, the music we share is, it speaks to individual stories, and every story is particular, but the commonality, that need to express what is going on, that need to connect with one another, that indelible message, it runs through our culture that states, I am here, I matter, hear me, join me. Let us sing together. Bring out the drums, let's jam. Let's get it on, on y va, vámonos. Let's freestyle. Put our favorite song on the jukebox, the CD, download. Music creates the communal strength to help our people respond to adversity with beauty. In the effort lies the art. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Hawk. So there's so much beauty in the islands of the Caribbean. But I began to realize there are also some constraints of small island nations for those who are dreaming big dreams and willing to take a risk. And so it's not surprising that many young people felt the need to leave their island to pursue their dream. Eddie, that's part of what you did. So tell us about your arrival in Canada as an 18-year-old.
Yes, I was 18, and I was so eager to leave Grenada, and all I was thinking about is musicians were saying, oh, I'm going on the road, or I just came off the road, and I just wanted to go on the road. I had no idea what road means, but I wanted to go on the road. And I vividly remember coming off the plane, going to the immigration officer and saying, here's my passport. And he looked at me and he goes, you're moving to Canada from Grenada? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, can we exchange places? Can I move there? And he was asking me if I was crazy, and I was like, no, I want to go on the road. So, yeah, man, I got off, and my mom was here. She was my sponsor and loved me dearly. I was sad to leave my dad, but I wanted to go on the road. So, I came, I met some friends, they introduced me to musicians, and I just made alliances. And I remember about 3 weeks after I got here, a good friend of mine, piano actually player in the city by the name of Kingsley Etienne. And Kingsley called me up and he goes, Eddie, I have a gig in Sonia and I don't want to do it. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yes, man. I had no idea where Sonia was. All I know is I am going on the road. So there was no rehearsal. I had no idea where I was going, but I left 2 guys in a van. They picked me up, one skinny guy, one short guy, and we were driving to Sonia. I have no idea where I'm going, what I'm doing, but I'm on the road now. I'm on the road. And, after some small talk and told them all about Grenada, and they sort of started briefing me about Canada, strange things, and decided to make a set list. And I was like, yes. And I go, do you know this song? No. Do you know this song? No. I have no idea, because this was a kind of rock and roll band that I'm going on the road with. Just remember, I'm from Grenada. The thing that we listen to is American Top 40 with Casey Kasem. Those are the songs that I know. And at one point they said, do you want to do cocaine? And I was like, cocaine? Like, what did my friend Kingsley get me into? I wanted to go on the road, but I don't want to do cocaine. And these guys want to do cocaine. You know what they were talking about, right? Eric Clapton's song, Cocaine. This poor Canadian just arrived, had no idea, and you could see the relief on my face when I figured it was a song called Cocaine. Had no idea. So, you know, that was my trip on the road. And so I got involved in the Canadian music scene and made alliances everywhere I went. And, you know, from that gig, I will never forget the name of the guy that I played with was a guy called Robert E. Lee. Never saw him since. And, you know, I just met about 6 months ago, I met a lady who knew him. So all my years in Canada, almost 40 years, I'm talking about Robert E. Lee, and nobody knows who Robert E. Lee is. However, I started my musical career. I started playing with calypso bands. Then I started playing with reggae bands, Leroy Sibbles, Nana McClain. You know, then started doing a little producing. And eventually I was able to have my own studio. And I look back and I see the amount of people who've gone through my studio. It's an immense amount. And anyway, that's a little story of Eddie.
Maybe this is the time to talk about that little studio of yours. But first, we want to acknowledge what Aita is doing in this center, creating her walls of fame. The first day I came in here, that big white wall was filled with pictures of artists, that whole back half. And I wandered along seeing so many people out of my past that were represented on the wall. Molly Johnson, Joe Seeley, Phyllis Marshall, who helped me in my first fundraising program to bring African students here. Then, of course, I see on Aita's Wall of Fame, Eddie Bullen. And he's very close to Salome Bay, who, as a young man, I was just in love with Salome Bay. What a fabulous artist. Me too. So then I get down to Eddie's studio. And he has a wall that just reflects the people that he's been helping become musicians. And so with my cousin Ross's help, we said, Eddie, this is your cross-cultural Wall of Fame. And so tonight, this was just created for tonight. And we would like to pass it on to you, and perhaps it'll find its way up on your wall.
Oh,
I know, I don't get out much. Still on the road, yes.
Some of you will perhaps be wondering now, like, how did Eddie and I get started? And some of you have heard part of this story, but let me take a moment to explain. We both got brought together by a wonderful athlete, producer, filmmaker, entrepreneur, Sylvia Sweeney, Oscar Peterson's niece. And she brought us in as volunteers into a program that she was running. And we were sitting not far apart, but we were busy doing administrative work until Sylvia said, I want you guys to come to New York with me. because we want to go and try to get the support of this really iconic entertainer in New York. Eddie, little music so they can guess who we're going to see. Who are we going to see, folks? Harry Belafonte. Eh? So there we are at a dinner party with Harry Belafonte, and the conversation is between Sylvia and Harry, until Harry starts to talk about his performance at the Independence Day celebrations in Kenya. And Sylvia says, oh, well, you ought to invite Don to talk about that because he knows a lot about that period in Kenya's history. And Harry says, how is that? And I started to tell him how, as a high school teacher, I had created a program that joined up with some Americans and we ran airlifts of students. And Harry suddenly says, you're that young teacher in the African Student Foundation in Canada. I said, yeah, we were connected years ago. Not just with Harry Belafonte, but with the celebrities that were supporting the program in the U.S. Jackie Robinson, the first black baseball player. A. Philip Randolph, the head of the largest black union in the States, the Pullman Porters Union. Sidney Poitier from Bahamas, the first black actor to win an Academy Award for Lilies in the Field, and Harry. So needless to say, much of the rest of the evening was Harry and I recounting about the people we had brought, which we realized included Barack Obama's father. After dinner, the other guests at the dinner were talking to me about this exuberant, exciting musician, Eddie Bullen. And I was saying, that's not the Eddie I know. I knew Eddie as a quiet, contained administrative assistant in a nonprofit. So when I got back from Toronto, I said, Eddie, there's something you're not sharing with me. So on a Friday night in a pub called the Dominion on Queen, I got to see the real Eddie Bullen. Show him, Eddie. Thank you, thank you. And at that point, Eddie and I started our friendship journey, and it's been a great one. In preparing for this part of the journey, I'm asking my colleagues to educate me about music from the Caribbean. I've spent a lot of time in the Caribbean. I've enjoyed a lot of music, but I don't know anything really about it. So I asked Eddie, if you were trying to represent the music of the Southern Caribbean, what would it be? And the answer I got was, you'd not be far wrong if you focused on calypso and pan. Eddie, share with our friends some of what you've been trying to educate me about.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd like to start by saying pan music in the Caribbean islands especially in Grenada, where I grew up, it was an integral part. There was a pan side just outside my bedroom window, and every night at about 6:30, you could hear the pan start tinkling, bling, bling. And then at about 7 o'clock, you'd hear them knocking the pan. All right, now we start, and then they'd start playing. And that will put me to bed. They'll do that until about 10 o'clock. And that'll happen, as I think every evening, it'll be a competition. It's called Panorama Night. And they'll be all practicing for Panorama Night. But it seems like all year round, Pan is part and parcel of my culture and my being. So I grew up with Pan. However, my dad wasn't really fond of me playing Pan. He said, son, you just play the piano. That's your instrument. So I did. However, I knew a lot of Pan players, and and then I grew to love Pan. And one of the things that I used to wait for is there was TTT, which is Trinidad and Tobago Television, and I remember we sat in front of the TV on Panorama Night. That's just before Carnival started, and we solo harmonized the band. Do you remember Solo Harmonize? That was my favorite band, and a guy called Ray Hallman used to arrange for them. Yes. And man, I would sit in the TV and watch that TV. And remember, Trinidad is really far away, so the TV is just rolling now, right? I can't see a thing. I'm just trying to read between the rows. Just to see and to hear. And, you have 200 pans coming at you. It's just, through the TV, I'm just imagining that I'm in there and I'm listening to all those pans. And those guys would do a 10-minute arrangement, just phenomenal. And if any of you haven't heard it Pan, I suggest you find a Pan side and go listen to it, because it's unbelievable. So that was that was the thing that burnt a hole in me. And that was one of the things that myself and my dad bonded on, because he would root for another Pan side and I would root for Solo Harmonites. And
Eddie, maybe it's a good time to reference a quite famous Pan band orchestra in this town that Aita has introduced me to.
Yes.
How many of you know Pan Fantasy? Not many. So you have, you're in for a great delight, because Aita took me out one night to the old Airdrome at Downsview. And the same thing that Eddie's just talking about. It's late in the evening, and these large numbers of people of all ages. The youngest one was 9 or 10. The oldest was in late 60s. And they're practicing. And the thing that surprised me was the sophistication. That Pan was a sophisticated art, which is what you keep talking about. Yeah. And that Pan Fantasy Band is likely to go in the Guinness Book of Records for their wins, eh? But it's an amazing display for me, and the excitement of the GO train going by, where the engineers have realized that this band practices there all the time, and they start opening their windows to listen. And now I just said, watch when the next train goes by. And the train goes by, whoa, whoa. The engineer's now blowing his horn for Pan Fantasy. Hawk, you have some connections with Pan music. Come and share us some of your stories.
I just wanted to say a little something. One of the things we psychologists do is pick on themes and keep on touching on them. It's pretty annoying most of the time. But we talked earlier about responding to adversity with beauty. We talked about the dynamic aspect of the crossroads. I think another thing we talk about when we talk about traditional music within the Caribbean, within the African diaspora context, the tradition is innovation. And with Pan music, it reverts all the way back to the time of the griots and praise singers and people who keep the history of a community. But it's also something when resources are taken away from you. In communities where they didn't have trumpets and trombones and everything in the schools for everyone to play, these kids innovated, and they found a way with discarded metal to make not just music, but beautiful and sophisticated music. And it's a tradition that keeps on today, even in the tradition of hip hop. When they came and they gutted the school budgets in New York City and elsewhere, and we had no band instruments like this, 2 turntables and a microphone, and changed the world. So pan music is not an outlier. It is part of this shared history and a beautiful manifestation of how we do respond to adversity with beauty. I just want to add that.
Are you getting a sense of the wonderful education I'm getting on this friendship journey? Eddie, keep going with my education and tell us a little bit about Calypso now and a couple of your famous Calypso singers.
Well, the 2 Calypso singers that in my time that was very instrumental in sort of shaping the trajectory of Calypso is the Mighty Sparrow and the Lord Kitchener, right? And the Mighty Sparrow actually was born in Grenada. And so I kind of was leaning to more Mighty Sparrow-ish, you know? But I cannot take away anything from Lord Kitchener because he wrote some melodies that were just unbelievable. The Mighty Sparrow, he delivered the lyric. I had a chance to work with the Mighty Sparrow. I recorded him in my studio, and I never forget. I was asking him, a lot of questions, and I said to him, "Why Mighty Sparrow?" He goes, "Because they used to chase me away because I was a sparrow, small, and had Roaring Lion and the Bomber and all those things." Anyway, so he had to put mighty in front of sparrow. So anyway, I loved a lot of songs from the Mighty Sparrow. One of them in particular was a song called Education. And that song always gave me shivers because of kind of what it said. Should I know?
Go ahead.
I should. So the line in this song is like after this song would play, I'd go and study as hard as possible. Right. It goes. This is the chorus. Children, go to school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you're gonna catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be misery. You're better off dead. For there is no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't follow idle companions, they'll lead you astray. To earn tomorrow, you better learn today. I get goosebumps every time. That song, and it's just the way he delivered it, just was so heart-wrenching. And for a boy, I think I was 8 or 9 years old, I would just go get my books. My mom, if she knew that was all it took, I think she would just play that song continuously.
So in our first session last June, we talked about the African griot, the local poet, the singer of local songs, the connector of local history. And when I listened to Eddie and Hawk both talking to me about the Calypso singers, clearly they're in the tradition of the African griots and are another element of this cultural triangular trade that we're trying to get our mind around. Now, we've been talking mostly about musicians, But if you turn to the writers, there's, again, a great host of people to draw upon. Looking into the research I was trying to do, I found that in one year, 1992, all the major European prizes for literature were won by writers from the Caribbean. Cousineau from Martinique won the French prize. Loinaz from Cuba won the Cervantes Prize in Spain. And Derek Walcott from St. Lucia won the Nobel Prize. I also began to realize that many of the best-known Caribbean writers made their mark in the diaspora after leaving their island. And some of them are being demonstrated in this center. The man standing at the back, the big statue there with the white background, is Marcus Garvey from Jamaica. He ran his amazing network of the Universal Negro Improvement Association from Harlem. And he had many branches in Canada, a big division here in Toronto, which I found was located in a building not far away, 335 College Street. And although Garvey was long gone by the end from 1925 until 1987, that was the headquarters for the United Negro Improvement Association. Some of you may know the place better because it became a reggae bar called the Timeless Bar. Right? Another one that has been dear to my heart, and Eddie and I went to visit the center he helped create in Harlem, and that's Arturo Schomburg, a Puerto Rican. He was part of the radical tradition in the Caribbean, but interestingly, in the US, he turned his passion to somewhat the passion I see in your life, Ida. The passion of writing books, creating books, gathering books, encouraging people to donate books, and then making those books available. And so Arturo was the strength behind the amazing Schomburg Center for Black Culture on Malcolm X Boulevard in Harlem. Who else might we talk about? Amy Césaire from Paris, one of the founders of the Negritude movement. One that had a big impact in my life was E.R. Braithwaite from Guyana. I didn't know until recently that when he left and went to England, he got a PhD in physics from Oxford, but couldn't get a job, and felt it was mainly because of who he was and from where he was. So to keep alive, he took on a teaching job in a low-income area of East London, and it sparked him to write a book called To Sir with Love. He wrote the book in 1958. I was a struggling high school teacher who began in the fall of 1957. I devoured that book, and it really did give me the inspiration to stay on track. And of course, then years later, Sidney Poitier, whom we mentioned earlier, played the lead role in the movie about the book. a final reference to an external writer would be V.S. Naipaul, who spent most of his life not in Trinidad but in Britain. But again, he wrote both fiction and nonfiction. And the books that I have used, that a couple of you have spent time in my condo looking at my library, may have seen his travel book, which helps explain what travel can do for your life and how it can inspire you. Naipaul also won the Nobel Prize for Literature. It's quite an incredible story as we try in our small way to capture a little of this narrative of the magic globally of artists and storytellers from the Caribbean. So then we had to move from the Southern Caribbean to the north, and if I could use calypso and pan to kind of introduce myself to Southern Caribbean, what was I going to use up north? And these colleagues who are trying to educate me in musicology, of course, start showing, well, there's ska, there's dub. Hawk says, no, don't forget the rumba, like don't forget the salsa coming out of Cuba, the Afro-Cuban mixture with Spanish guitars and African percussionists and mixed with American jazz. And then somebody says, oh yeah, but there's Zouk from Guadeloupe and Compass from Haiti. Like, and at this head I'm saying, how do I keep this all clear, guys?
We were trying.
Yeah. So I said, for tonight we're going to concentrate on one island, Jamaica, and we're going to concentrate on one music style, reggae. And even when you turn to that one island and one music style, you find there's a great collection of outstanding people you can pick. You know, is it Scratch Perry? Is it Desmond Decker? Is it Jimmy Cliff, who made it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? But if I were to ask you to tell me, if we had to pick one name of a Jamaican musician whose beliefs and musicality impacted the world, who would we be talking about? Bob Marley.
Yes.
Let's go, boys. So when we turn our attention to Bob Marley. He was certainly one of the most charismatic and challenging musicians of the 20th century. His music identified oppressors. He agitated for social justice. He promoted world peace, all the while letting his listeners just forget their troubles and enjoy the music. He was born in 9 Mile, Jamaica, one of those areas that had kept alive a great deal of the African cultural traditions that the slaves had brought. And particularly the issue of storytelling. And in the mid-60s, Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, visited Jamaica. And he had a significant impact on Bob Marley and his wife, Rita. And they began to practice the Rastafarian beliefs. Bob began wearing his hair in dreadlocks, and for a while actually went to Ethiopia and stayed in a commune that the emperor had arranged for any visiting Jamaicans. Meanwhile, back in Jamaica in the 1970s, the soaring unemployment, the food rationing, the terrible political violence that was occurring at the time, and the pervasive hold by the International Monetary Fund on the economy of Jamaica began to have a strong influence on the social consciousness lyrics that entered the repertoire of Bob Marley and the Wailers. So, Eddie, speak to us a bit about the influence of Marley on your life.
Well, I think, I mean, starting when I was just, a teenager, there were several neighbors that we had, and every morning I'd wake up and I'd hear a Bob Marley song. So, I think I know every Bob Marley song ever written, because as soon as that record came out, there were 2 or 3 neighbors and they start playing, and they'll play different albums all at the same time. So you're hearing, Get Up, Stand Up one place, Coming Out of the Cold the next one, and War on the next side. But Bob Marley, and a lot of my friends who were sort of looking for an identity, I think when Bob Marley came on the scene, they all found a home. And a lot of them started growing dreadlocks and being a lot more conscious about their surroundings, and just being spiritual as well too, because I think Bob was a very spiritual guy. And a lot of that rubbed off on me as well too, because I, again, who was a musician, really loved what he brought to the culture. And one of the things that I loved about Bob Marley is that the lyric content was so strong, and equally as the music. The music was very memorable. And that was one of the things that I think a great songwriter has. You can look at a lot of great songwriters, and once you hear, you hear Bob Marley bass line from a car way in the distance, and you know exactly it's Bob Marley. You know what I mean? You can start singing it. So I think for me, as a musician, as a songwriter, he really shone a light with regards to my upbringing, and just hanging out and playing with a lot of Jamaican musicians in the city. I got to really go deep into the soul of Bob Marley's music.
This has been part of our interesting friendship journey, because until getting ready for tonight, Eddie and I had not talked about Bob Marley. And then as we were trying to decide how to focus tonight, we both started talking about influences. Mine were quite different. Just as Marley was coming into his musical prominence, I was spending a lot of time in Jamaica, late 60s and through the 70s. And I had the great good fortune to be working with some pretty amazing people. So one of my colleagues was Sir Philip Sherlock, the first Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. I worked with a wonderful educator and researcher by the name of Errol Miller. Errol was a prominent writer who was documenting the nuances in discrimination in Jamaica based on slight shifts in the color of your skin. And then I got to become a partner in an organization called IDRC with a truly Renaissance man, Rex Nettleford. Rex was a writer, a labor leader, an educator, a social activist, and he was a choreographer. And then when I went to the first social night with the National Dance Troupe, there he was, the premier dancer of the National Dance Troupe. Quite an amazing man. Through these three individuals, they were giving me entry into various cultural groups in Jamaica, which meant I got a chance to know a number of Rastas, be welcomed into some of their sessions. And I remember even getting nervous one night because I was feeling so warmly welcomed and they were treating me like a brother. And I finally had to say to one of them, I hope you realize, like, when I go home to Canada, I go to a conservative, mainly white community of London, Ontario. Like, this is not my day-to-day life. And I don't want to be posing here. And they responded so lovely by saying, no, not worry. You're a soulmate. It's clear. What you may live and do in London, Ontario is not of our concern. It was an amazing openness to difference. And when you use the expression for the first time a few weeks to me about liming, I suddenly started to realize, I guess that's what I've been doing in a lot of my life, just liming, just hanging about with interesting people that help bring some real richness to your life. So by 1973, Marley's albums To Catch a Fire and Burn got extensive media attention. So he's now starting to be known globally. And one of the anthem tracks became the kind of anthem of insurgency used around the world. It was used by freedom fighters in Zimbabwe. It was sung by Maoris in New Zealand fighting to retain their culture. And most recently, it was used by the protesters who were trying to take over Wall Street. So you'll recognize the tune. Let's hear a little music from the 1973 tracks. A Marley song that went around the world. Okay. By 1976, Marley was really catapulted into stardom with the release of Rastaman Vibrations. And one of the key songs there was the song that's been mentioned a couple of times already tonight, War. Hawk, I want you to come up again because you've had some experiences in different communities with the impact of the song War.
Thank you. I think one of the many amazing things about Bob Marley that we can touch upon is the power of his words, the importance of words, but also the power of communication that goes beyond words. And I've had the privilege of living in a lot of Francophone countries where Bob Marley is a legend. It's beyond a legend. When I was living in Senegal, if a Bob Marley song comes on, everybody sings. From beginning to end, A to Z, soup to nuts, every syllable, they got it. And then at the end of the song, they would look at me and be, "Hey, mon frère, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? My brother, what does that mean?" I'm like, "Man, you just sang the song from A to Z." But being a teacher and learning from the best, I would never just give the answer. I was sort of like, "Qu'est-ce que tu en penses, hein? So what do you think it meant?" And guaranteed, they would give about 90% of what he said, even though they didn't speak the language. Somehow, it went across linguistic barriers. It was an amazing thing. So a little later on in life, I'm living in Paris, and I'm playing with a band there. We were an eclectic band of vagabonds. Our lead singer was from Cameroon. His name was Solomon. So of course he got named King Solomon. We were King Solomon et les immigrés. So King Solomon and the immigrants. Our bassist was from Togo, and we made the circuit. Every weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, we were at Saint Michel, we were at the Pompidou Center, we were at Les Halles, we played all over. Played reggae, some original songs, some African reggae musicians, Alpha Blondy, Lucky Dube, but the king, of course, was Bob Marley. So Solomon would wear his headset and he would sing these Bob Marley songs, and I'm just playing horn, trying to keep up, but when Bob Marley plays, you gotta sing. So I'm behind him singing and doing all that, and I think he got irritated at one point, like, here's this Anglophone guy behind me singing. You know what, here. And he gave me the headset. And we were in Paris and playing, and the song was War. And so I got this headset on, and the bass line came in, and so war's happening. I'm like, oh my goodness. I got this thing in my head, and I'm checking out the crowd, and I'm about ready to sing, and there are these Rastas flowing around, and Parisian Rastas, if you have a hierarchy of like cool in the world, Parisian Rastas are like way up here. You know, they got their immigration history, and then someone can just say, yo, ça va, Rasta, ça va. And you can say that, you're cool. And so I'm all jazzed, and I'm like, until the philosophy which holds one race inferior than another, inferior, is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. Everywhere it's war. It's a war. Now these brothers are all listening to me like, whoa. And my head is exploding. I'm having a life moment here. And I got so wrapped up in myself, I forgot the lyrics to the next verse. So I panicked and I went straight to the call and response. I was like, woo-yah, woo-yah, and you could just see the look of disappointment on these brothers' faces. And Solomon just came over and took my headset off of me and put it on. I was like, you play that, I'll sing. But it's just to make us laugh, but realize Bob Marley transcends lyrics and all of that. It's the message that counts, and that he also shows us it can't be about us. It's got to be about the music and the message, or we get lost in it. All right. So thank you. I just want to share that.
How would you like to have Hawk as one of your fellow travelers on a journey of friendship? Yeah, you eat a lot, he says. War became the anthem of equality and was really embraced by the oppressed people around the world. And then in '78, Marley came back to Jamaica and organized the One Love Peace Concert. And many of you may know that in getting ready to start the concert, there was an attempted assassination of Marley, a failure. The concert went on. He got 12 other reggae groups to put on a wonderful concert. But most important, he got the feuding political leaders, Edmund Seaga of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister Michael Manley. He got them on stage, shaking hands to One Love. And for that, he got the UN Medal of Peace. When we come to his final album, it would appear he was really trying to court and attract a young North American audience. And so I want to turn to the youngest member of our friendship journey. And I hope you've got the sense that the journey started with two, but the first night we said it was a friendship journey with Eddie and Dawn. And we were inviting people to join us. And Hawk has become a fellow traveler. And this young man behind me, Eddie's son, who's not only carrying on the traditions of his father and his grandfather, he's showing all kinds of signs that he's going to take the narrative in an even greater direction. So the other night, sitting in Eddie's studio, Quincy came down the stairs and I thought, okay, what does Marley mean to a young 26-year-old?
Where to begin? Well, Marley, I don't think I needed my father to know who Marley was. Marley was everywhere. Bob Marley is an inspiration to many young and old. The message that he speaks is unfortunately a message that we must hear very often. It seems like we must be reminded of it almost every generation. So for me, it's wonderful to be at least appreciative of what he brought to the world. For me, I only wish to achieve a very small amount of what he has achieved. For me, I think that Bob Marley kind of explained the good and the bad of Jamaica. He was like the weatherman. He would tell you when Jamaica's feeling sunny, and he'd tell you when Jamaica's feeling rainy. So for me, I take that and I look at people like him. I look at people like Gordon Downey. I feel like there's a lot of people that have that same trait, and I hope to have the same one that he did, and I hope to create a conversation that I think that we all are sometimes afraid to create, and I think that he has and was able to do so with beautiful music. So for me, it's to create a beautiful music and to symbolize a beautiful message in that, and I think that for me, I want to do that for Canada.
Quincy, I hope that this indicates that you've become a fellow traveler on this friendship journey.
I forgot my passport, but
the other night, as we were trying to have our few moments to be ready for this evening, and you can see it's an eclectic group. I mean, these two guys actually had an hour to share something this afternoon before the evening. It's not a tightly honed presentation, but it's full of integrity. Right? And the thing that hit me on Monday night sitting in Eddie's studio was, we're trying to explore the global magic impact of musicians and artists from the Caribbean. And at the end, I'm talking about how Marley influenced my life. Eddie's talking a little younger than I am about how Marley has impacted his life. We go down the age spectrum a little further, and somebody else is talking about how Marley impacted him. And when I asked the 26-year-old, have you got something you'd like to say? He could have talked for the rest of the evening. He just brought out the passion, and I thought, I guess that's a pretty good case made for the magical impact. So I want to bring this program to an end by inviting Quincy to deal with one of the emotional songs from Marley's last album, Uprising.
all pirates, yes, they rabbi. So I to the merchant ship. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, my head was made strong by the hands of the Almighty. We forward this generation, whoa, triumphantly. Won't you help to sing the songs of freedom? 'Cause all I'd ever had, yeah, is a redemption song. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy. None of them can stop the times. How long shall we kill our prophets while we stand outside and look? Some say we're just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing the songs of freedom? Yeah. 'Cause all I'd ever had, redemption songs. Yeah. I see you trying to sing that. I see you. Redemption song, yeah. Oh. the songs of freedom, yeah. 'Cause all I'd ever had, redemption songs.
Thank you so much, Quincy. Redemption Song. There's no particular words for me to add on top of that. So I now invite you to share any reflections you have of this journey we took you on tonight. Any questions you'd like to raise of anybody in the crew? How was your voyage?
Speechless.
Ross.
It's been great being on the road.
Yes.
So meet you at the Coda meeting.
Meet you at the Coda?
Yeah.
Meet you at the Coda?
I keep hearing that with jazz.
I think Coda may be a
Just
place.
that they all get together and they just end up together.
Yeah.
Do their own thing.
Yeah.
It's a certain type of jazz.
Yeah.
It's kind of directions like into the music, so even if you go in your different ways, you know where you're going to end up at a particular time to put it all together.
Sorry, I know what she's meaning now. Yes, and it's a musical term. Yes.
I figured that out, but I wasn't quite sure.
Exactly.
My sister is a great lover of jazz. Hey.
Yes.
And Phyllis Marshall, who was such a strong supporter for me in my early days, it turns out was a close friend of my sister. But the comment that you were just talking about is very important to me, and it's important what some of us are trying to do of taking the creativity of the artists into other sectors of life. Because we have a strong recognition now that one of the fundamentals we need in today's kind of world is collaboration, active listening. And it's been wonderful to me to bring the musicians in with the business leaders, and the business leaders be blown away by, how do you guys learn how to do that? How can Hawk come in from New York and spend a few moments with Eddie and play music together? So that's part of the journey we're trying to carry into other sectors. So when I ask for your reflections, there's mostly silence now. I hope that is thoughtful silence. But I am inviting you. We're testing this. We don't know where it's going to go. We're going to open a site in the new year. Your reactions, your comments will help us shape the journey. I got a question over here.
Today is October the 19th, and we ended with someone who was 26. So that makes a difference of 7. And we are at 777, and in story, 7 is important. You do things 7 times. Lucky 7, under 7, over 7. But October the 19th, and we ended on Quincy, who is 26. And that gives us a 7 at 777. And if you were to look at the screen, which you cannot see, we do look like City TV on a great day.
Thank you. You have a question here or a comment?
Okay, I didn't know I'd get a mic. Okay then. Crossroads for me has been a central part of my life, because for me it's crossroads where the storytellers meet, where we share our stories. We come from 4 directions and we leave in four directions. And I'm the keeper of the four winds, which is thousands upon thousands of books of stories from around the world. I consider it a crossroads. It is a place where we share our stories and our collected wisdom, which we don't all know. So I have to listen. And tonight, man, I've been putting that listening on, and I'm just blown away. I feel like I've come to another crossroads, and I'd like to say thank you.
So you're not upset that I didn't tell you before the event what this was all about? Thank you for your comments very much.
Just a little add. What wasn't mentioned was that the steel band is the newest musical instrument invented in the 20th century. I don't know if that was mentioned in passing. Yeah. Just want to share a quick Grenada experience of mine. I've been there several times, and I had a cousin living there at the time. She lived in the country, I can't remember what part. But I'm a stargazer. And one night I was at her place, and it was pitch dark, and I'm in my glory seeing all my stars up there. And there was a little street light about a block away, and another one about a mile on the other end. So the whole sky was at my disposal. And I'm standing at the gate just in glory, and I saw a man coming down the street. And as he got closer to me, he started looking up, and looking at me, and looking up. And I'm seeing out the side of my eyes, wondering, who's this nut? What the hell is he looking up at? But that's when I realized that growing up in Guyana, I had the whole heavens to myself, but I never appreciated it until I came to North America. And the obscurity of the lights took away from the glory of the universe until I went back to Grenada, and it was all there waiting for me.
Thank you for those comments, and thank you for coming in from Pickering on an evening to take another step on our friendship journey. By the way, the reference to Pan, before you leave, you may, if you haven't already, look at a new invention of Pan in the back of the room. It's an electronic pan invented by one of Ida and Eddie's friends here in Toronto. You had a question. Can I pass that in to you?
Hi, so this event was amazing, and I picked up on a few themes that I just wanted to elaborate on. So the idea of the Caribbean being the first multicultural place was actually very, like you expressed that was very new in terms of, you know, you narrating that outside of the Caribbean studies community in terms of academic, because I've never heard someone outside of that demographic speak about Caribbean as the first multicultural space, whether it's forced or, well, it was forced, but it was the first time outside of the Caribbean Studies Department I've ever heard anyone in Canada speak or recognize that the Caribbean was the first multicultural place, or one of the first multicultural space in the Western Hemisphere. So congratulations on picking that up. One thing that I loved was the fact that the theme of, you know, Bob Marley and the Rastafarian, which I think we all appreciated, but I think Hawk said something earlier that kind of framed Bob Marley and the whole journey, which is empowerment out of diversity, right? So a lot of these cultural expressions came out of lacking, right? And so the steel band was because we didn't have the instruments, and reggae came because we were looking for something that, you know, reflected our belief system. And that also expressed the belief system of the Rastafarianism, right? So I also wanted to bring forth that Rastafarians at that time were being hunted and killed, massacred during that time, right? So that was the fact that we're all here, and Bob Marley's music has informed the way that we understand ourselves and our personhood, is very instrumental, because that subculture and that targeted population came also out of despair. So that's kind of my observation, and I wanted to commend you all for, framing it in this way. And, the music and the journey transcends race, age. It's really eclectic and honest and raw.
I wanted to share a quick anecdote with regards to the universality of the Marley music experience, because I think we've all recognized how powerful this individual has been as a creator. And for those of you who have traveled extensively, and I'm trying to catch up to Don. Don is my benchmark for countries to see, and he's about 30 countries ahead of me so far, so I'm still working at it. But I remember some years ago I was traveling in northern Thailand, and I was in Chiang Mai in northern Thailand, and I came across a place called the Rasta Cafe. So of course, I decided, I decided I had to go into the Rasta Cafe and check out what was going on in this Rasta Cafe. So I go into this Rasta Cafe, and it's full of these dreadlocked Thai guys, none of whom speak English, but the only music playing in the entire place is Bob Marley music, straight up Bob Marley, and they're all singing to the Bob Marley music, much like you were alluding to, right? Exactly. They don't know what the words are, they don't know what the words mean, but they're all jamming to the Bob Marley music. And I mean, it's a real and incredible testimony to the power of his creative genius to be able to produce music that is so transcendent in its essence that everybody who is touched by it and connected to it will feel the vibratory frequency, the positive messaging, and the kind of energetic essence that he is trying to convey through that music without actually knowing the nature of the lyrical content or what he's actually trying to say within that. And I mean, that was one of the most, so from that point, interestingly enough, on that same journey, I went further into northern Thailand to an even smaller town called Pai, which some of our friends here have been to. And I discovered in Pai, this little town in northern Thailand, I discovered a tiny little shop that a Japanese guy had set up. I know, this is a bizarre story. This Japanese guy comes from Japan to this little obscure town in northern Thailand called Pai and sets up a little shop where he's spinning vintage reggae vinyl. That he has a collection of vintage reggae vinyl that he's playing in this northern town in Thailand. So I mean, an incredible testimony to all of our Jamaican brethren and sistren, and Bob Marley as being, I suppose, the most impactful disseminator of that particular art form into the world, and we are tremendously blessed to have that. So hey, you got some big shoes to fill there, kids, so get working at it, You got a long way to go, but props.
Sorry, I want to add something again. I take up a lot of space, and it's okay. And it's okay. So I just wanted to say, because if I didn't say this, I wouldn't feel justified leaving here. A lot of the work that Bob Marley and the Wailers put forward, the contribution of Peter Tosh was very instrumental to that. The writing of the lyrics, and I'm not in any sense downplaying Bob Marley. What I am saying is that there is a dynamic that recognizes some performers over others. And in Jamaica specifically, shadism, which is what you also refer to, might play a role in who is recognized and who is not. And I just want to say, if Bob Marley is going to be an instrumental theme in this journey, perhaps considering Peter Tosh's contribution might be useful.
Wonderful comments for me, because I hope you have the sense that we really are on a journey. And I'm heading back into libraries to, Well, I knew about Braithwaite, but I better go and look. Oh, Braithwaite was a PhD in physics? No, I thought he was a novel writer. I didn't know Tosh until I start digging further into Marley. So my struggle in trying to be the narrator of the script is, what do you fit in? So comments and reminders like that are just great, and it's what we're looking for, because we don't have a map. We're creating our map, right? Okay. Yeah, Frantz Fanon. If you had been at our first part of the journey, you would have seen us again presenting some of the people that have influenced our lives. So to me, it's been a great experience with these guys getting to this point. Hawk, you want to respond?
I'm sorry. You see me over here, I'm like ready to jump out of my chair over here because there's so much wonderful energy going on. The comments around the crossroads, the universality of all that, it's all resonating in my head. And it's also something that we had talked about earlier this week. And the ancestors are also knocking really hard, because I'm looking at this Anansi t-shirt and set up over here, just over here at the books. I saw Anansi in the moss-covered rock and all that, and these wonderful things. It's my daughter's favorite. And there's a story, if you don't mind, if I can impose on you for just a couple more minutes before I go back across the border, that I think really touches on this, and just the shared love, the shared wisdom, the spiritual sharing that goes across cultures. And the story goes, well, there's Anansi the spider, and you know Anansi, and he is a beautiful manifestation of this triangular cultural sharing. He's known on the continent as Brer Anansi the spider in Ghana and other Akan nations. He came to the Caribbean. But Anansi came to a lot of, he's also known down south, Brer Rabbit, and these stories overlap. But wherever he goes, he's a hustler. Brer Rabbit, Anansi, he's a hustler, and he's always trying to get over. And in this particular story, and it's my favorite one, and save it for the end of the night because it's what my mom used to use to put me to sleep. He was out there trying to hustle the rabbit in the, so when Nancy's trying to hustle the rabbit, he's like, yeah, he's doing some 3-card Monte, or, just give me some money, you'll get 10 times back your return, real estate, or whatever. He was doing something. And the rabbit was like, you know what? This sounds kind of shady. I don't want to do it. And he walked away from the deal. And then Nancy got really upset. And he's like, man, how, if only I could gather up all the wisdom and the common sense in the world for me, I could get over on everybody. So he set about that plan, and he went up to his home, which was in the top of the very, very tallest, impossibly tall tree in the forest, got his things together, came down, and he got a big calabash. And he went off on his mystical journey. And he went to all the magical places. He swam down to the deepest part of the ocean, and he found some wisdom, and he put it in his calabash. He climbed to the top of the tallest mountain, found some wisdom, put it in his calabash. The deepest cave, he went there, found wisdom, put it in his calabash. He waited for the rain, and the rainbow came. He went to the end of the rainbow, found magic and wisdom, and put it in his calabash. All over the world, center of the deepest desert, he went there, all the magical spots. And he came home to the forest, and he had a calabash full of wisdom and common sense. He said, I have all the wisdom and common sense in the world. It's all for me. Now I just have to get it up into that tree. And so he tied a rope around his neck, put the calabash in front of him, and started climbing up the tree. But he started hitting his knee. Ow, ow, boom, boom, elbow, boom. And spiders got a lot of elbows and knees, so he's like bumping and making all kinds of noise. And the rabbit comes out of his hole, and then Nancy's almost to the top, making all that noise. Ooh, ow, ooh, ow, ooh. And he said, hey, Nancy, you fool. If you tie that calabash on your back, you wouldn't keep on hitting your knees and waking me up. Man, be quiet. And then Nancy realized he didn't have all the common sense and wisdom in the world, because Rabbit still had some. So he realized that he failed, and he took his calabash with all the magic and the wisdom, and he threw it down. from the top of the tallest, impossibly tall tree. It hit the ground and broke into a million zillion pieces right as the wind came and blew it away and dispersed it. Which is why, up until this day, no matter where you go, if you keep your eyes open, you can find a little bit of wisdom and common sense. That's our tradition. That's what we're trying to share with you today. The ancestors compelled me to tell that story, so please bear with me. Here you go, sir.
A wonderful ending story about Anansi. And it's the Jamaicans that we have to credit for being one of the strongest groups that took those folk tales from Ashanti land, from Akan people, and kept them alive and fed them into the world. So it brings us full cycle to the kind of stuff that Ita is trying to create here. The publishing of books, the idea that Anansi represents the spirit of all storytellers, okay? And that it connects across the ages. If you look at Sesame Street, you find Anansi. If you look at Disney TV, you find Anansi. If you look at Raffi's songs, you find Anansi. If you look at Marvel Comics, who was the original Spider-Man? Anansi. Okay? So the traditions of West Africa taken to Jamaica and going out around the world are very much alive. And in Canada, we have a press called the House of Anansi. It was created by one of my colleagues. In 1967, David Godfrey came back from a CUSO teaching experience in Ghana, and an unknown young poet then was asking his buddy, would you help publish my poems? And David said, I got a good name for the publishing house, the House of Anansi. And remember, when we're talking about sharing our stories, in 1967, if you went into the bookstores, the corner stores, and looked at the magazine racks, you would not find any Canadian stories. If you went to the movie houses, you would not find any Canadian stories. If you turned on the radio, you would not hear any Canadian music. So our journey into telling our own stories is very young. It started in the 60s. It's not 60 years old yet, but we're part of it, and this place is part of it. So the House of Anansi, not long after they got started publishing young writers like Margaret Atwood, George Grant, Northrop Frye, Austin Clarke, who lived and worked in this area and whose books are on these shelves. So, Hawk, it was very appropriate to listen to your ancestors and end the evening for us with Anansi Tales. I hope you have a sense that, remember, I started the journey by saying that there's a battle on in the world between people who have differing values and intentions, particularly about diversity and cross-cultural relationships. And in an age of divisive identity politics, it's not an easy sell to be saying we are hopeful and optimistic. But I want to end the evening by making clear that the team on this friendship journey are cockeyed optimists, right? And we're having great time together. We invite you to find ways to join us on this journey. And with that, Ita, we thank you again for giving us this opportunity Please come.
It was an incredible, incredible evening. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Quincy. Thank you, Hawk. And thank you, Don. And the testimony to how good it was and is because Matthew, Joshua, and Gabrielle were never once restless. And you ended on a Nancy, and at that moment, I'm not quite sure if it's Gabrielle or Joshua or Matthew, but he was reading Spider-Man. So there we go, right? So good energy, number 7. I think the evening was rich, and I think that you just need to keep on keeping on. And one of the coolest things about storytelling is you never rehearse it to death, you just do it. Nice. One love, everybody. Good night. Make sure you have some tea with us and some refreshments and continue to make new friends.